At this moment, my screams and the child's frightened cries filled the entire room. The doorbell rang urgently at that very instant, the cries mixed with the incessant ringing, leaving me flustered and overwhelmed. In the midst of this chaos, I opened the door.
Why are you here?
Why are you here?
Standing outside was my ex-boyfriend, David. 5 years ago, he left without a word, and now, after all this time, he was standing at my doorstep. For a moment, we both fell silent.
Dad, you're here!
A little boy, holding the candy jar I had just handed him, looked happily at David.
What?
I was stunned, looking back and forth between David and the child who bore a striking resemblance to him.
You, he. I
pointed back and forth, my mouth trembling, unable to form words. My mind raced. This child looked about 4 or 5 years old and called him Dad. The key point was that David and I broke up 5 years ago. Conclusion: I must have been David's secret lover, and he only realized his mistake after his wife had their child, deciding to cut ties and return to his family. My anger was about to burst from my eyes.
Let me come in and explain.
He stepped forward, but I blocked the doorway with my hand. David glanced down at my hand, his gaze cold, but I stood firm.
Dad, what's wrong with you and Mom?
Who is your mom?
I couldn't hold back my emotions and snapped at the child. Seeing him about to cry, David's voice turned stern.
Ethan.
Miraculously, the child stopped crying immediately, which only reinforced my suspicions. Taking advantage of the child's distraction, I quickly picked him up and handed him to David, then shut the door. The whole sequence was smooth and swift.
Wait, how did he get here?
I scanned the entire house until I saw the ladder by the balcony railing.
So, we were neighbors? What bad luck! I needed to move.
But enthusiasm is fleeting. Looking at the rental prices on the app, I clutched my wallet tightly. A working stiff can't afford to be impulsive, sobs. Outside, David stood with a dark expression, looking at the closed door. The child stood on the ground by himself.
Dad, isn't she Mom?
Ethan asked, a bit aggrieved, his little hand reaching for his father's.
She is Mom, but Mom doesn't recognize Ethan yet. We need to take it slow.
His warm hand gently tidied the child's messy hair. Ethan seemed to understand somewhat, the red marks from crying still on his face, his eyes adorably red. David held his hand and returned to the apartment next door, giving my closed door a deep look before shutting his own. No matter how reluctant they are to go to work, office workers always have to put on a smile. Just as I entered the office on Monday morning, Mr. Thompson, the grade director, stood at the door with his hands on his hips, smiling and waving at me.
Emma, come here for a moment.
What's the matter, Mr. Thompson?
This is a new student. He's young, so as his homeroom teacher, you should pay extra attention to him.
Mr. Thompson pushed the child from behind.
Hello, Ms. Emma.
I was stunned on the spot. This must be a coincidence, right? But our relationship is quite awkward now. How should I treat this child who looks exactly like David?
What are you thinking, Ms. Emma?
Nothing. Ethan, come with the teacher.
I was about to lead the way when a soft little hand slipped into mine. I was about to pull away when I looked down and saw the starry-eyed mini David. I quickly let go of his hand. It's not your fault you're David's child, but looking like him is definitely your fault. Ethan, satisfied with the brief warmth, smiled and followed me. Although this child looks like that scoundrel, his personality is nothing like his. As a young student, he's not mischievous at all, and his well-behaved nature has significantly reduced my prejudice against him. But the unexpected soon happened.
Ms. Emma, there's trouble in your class.
When I entered the classroom, Ethan was wrestling with another child. I hurriedly stepped in to separate them and called their parents.
Tell the teacher why you were fighting.
Before I could get any answers, the other child's parent arrived.
Who hit my precious baby? I'll teach that little rascal a lesson.
With their parent there, the child felt emboldened. Seeing their child crying so miserably, the parent was about to charge forward.
Please calm down, ma'am. We don't know the reason for the fight yet. Please calm down.
Then tell me the reason.
I subtly stepped back.
Ethan, tell the teacher why you were fighting.
Ethan remained silent, and seeing the parent about to pounce, I was as anxious as an ant on a hot pan.
Because he said I don't have a mom. He called me a child without a mom.
The innocent voice suddenly broke through the noisy classroom. The other child stopped crying, and the parent awkwardly retracted their hand. I looked at Ethan standing on the floor, clearly feeling wronged but repeatedly explaining the reason, his voice choked in tears on the verge of falling.
Ethan, you.
At that moment, David appeared.
Miss Carter, I hope you can give me a reasonable explanation.
His gaze felt like it could strip me of my skin and lock me in the deepest pit of hell.
It was my fault.
Ethan tugged at his father's sleeve, and David finally calmed down.
Miss Carter, I think as a teacher, you should focus on maintaining order in your class.
I didn't mean that. I just.
All right, Mr. Parent, I will certainly maintain order today. Let's not discuss unrelated matters.
After this incident, a bouquet of flowers appeared at my doorstep every day. I was so on edge I almost called the police. Until one day, I stepped out to see Ethan holding a bouquet in midair. When he saw me, he wasn't scared.
Miss Hannah, will you be my mom?
I got goosebumps all over. How could both the big and small ones be so abnormal? This only strengthened my resolve to move. But I still needed money. Looking at the latest performance bonus in the workgroup, my eyes lit up. The next day, I walked to the podium with a smile.
Class, quiet down, quiet down. Quiet down.
Silence fell. Indeed, being stern was more effective.
Kids, we're about to have exams, right? If you do well, the teacher will grant you a wish.
Teacher, can we really wish for anything?
Of course, but it has to be within the teacher's ability.
Seeing the students become more diligent in their morning studies, I couldn't help but smile. Yes, this is it. The leadership will surely notice.
Ms. Hannah, you're more nervous than the kids.
On the day the exam results came out, my colleagues teased as they saw my trembling legs. I thought to myself, of course, this is the result of my hard work.
All right, teachers, it's time for the meeting.
I couldn't focus on a single word of last week's work report.
Okay, lastly, we need to highlight the excellent performance of our teacher, Emma, in this exam. Well done!
Yay, yay, I got praised by the boss. Haha, the day of promotion and wealth is near. Even my steps to the classroom felt light. As I waved my pen, the students' wishes on small notes were handed to me. Children's wishes are so simple, a superhero figure or a doll can make them happy. I looked at the crooked little notes, envying their innocence. One note caught my attention: I want to go to the amusement park with the teacher. The handwriting was unusually neat for a child. I saw the signature, Ethan. After school, while standing at the school gate, seeing the students off, I asked,
Ethan, do you want to go to the amusement park?
Can't the teacher go?
Of course, I can. I'm just worried your dad might not agree to me taking you out.
Dad will definitely agree.
After seeing off the kids, I thought I should inform David, or he might accuse me of kidnapping his child. I found the friend request he had sent me a while ago and accepted it. Just as I was pondering how to start the conversation, a message popped up.
Ethan has already told me. He hasn't been to an amusement park before. Please take good care of him.
Alright then, since the parent agrees, I have nothing more to say. On the weekend, I stood at the entrance of the amusement park. David walked over, holding a miniature version of himself.
All right, I'll bring the kid back to you tonight.
I took Ethan's hand and started to walk in. Why can't I move? I turned around to see David holding onto his son, not letting go.
Ethan's dad, what are you doing?
Ethan wasn't feeling well this morning. I can take care of him if I'm around.
He grinned at me, looking a bit silly. I glanced at the child beside him, who was pretending to be uncomfortable despite looking perfectly healthy. This is challenging.
If you're not feeling well, we don't have to go. We can come back when you're better, and I'll take you alone, okay?
I emphasized the word alone. Without waiting for a response, I turned to leave.
Hannah, aren't you curious? I'll tell you everything.
I turned back. Ethan had his head down, probably crying. David was staring at me intensely. He really knows how to get to me.
All right, let's go in.
I stood in front of the father and son. Although the start wasn't pleasant, once we got inside, I couldn't help but enjoy myself. I hadn't been out to play since I started working. After riding the bumper cars with Ethan, we were both sweaty and sat on a bench.
Have some water.
David handed me a bottle with the cap already twisted off. As I drank, I watched him patiently open another bottle and carefully feed the water to Ethan. Back when we were together, he was just as patient. I always thought he'd make a great dad. David stood with a dark expression, looking at the closed door. Ethan stood beside him, clutching his little toy.
Dad, isn't she Mom?
She is, Ethan, but Mom needs some time to remember us. We need to be patient.
David's warm hand gently tidied Ethan's messy hair.
Okay, Dad.
David held Ethan's hand and they walked back to their apartment, giving the closed door one last look before shutting their own. David stood with a dark expression, looking at the closed door. Ethan stood beside him, looking confused.
Dad, isn't she Mom?
She is, Ethan. But she doesn't recognize you yet. We need to take it slow, okay?
David squatted down, tidying Ethan's hair gently with a reassuring smile.
Okay, Dad.
David held Ethan's hand, casting one last look at the closed door before leading him back to their apartment. David stood with a dark expression, looking at the closed door. Ethan stood beside him, looking confused.
Dad, isn't she Mom?
Ethan's small hand reached for his father's.
She is, but Mom doesn't recognize Ethan yet. We need to take it slow.
David squatted down, gently tidying Ethan's messy hair. Ethan seemed to understand somewhat, his eyes adorably red from crying.
Come on, let's go back inside.
David held Ethan's hand and returned to their apartment, giving the closed door one last look before shutting his own. David stood with a dark expression, staring at the closed door. Ethan, the child, stood by himself, looking confused and a bit sad.
Dad, isn't she Mom?
Ethan asked, his little hand reaching for his father's.
She is Mom, but Mom doesn't recognize Ethan yet. We need to take it slow.
David's warm hand gently tidied the child's messy hair.
Okay, Dad.
Ethan seemed to understand somewhat, the red marks from crying still on his face, his eyes adorably red.
Let's go home now.
David held Ethan's hand and returned to the apartment next door, giving the closed door a deep look before shutting his own.
Mom, when are you and Dad getting married? Mom, I saw Dad looking at rings recently. Mom, Dad seems to be booking a hotel.
Ethan, like a little spy, reported David's every move to me daily. Poor David didn't realize that his meticulously planned surprise had already been leaked by his own son. So, at the beach where I had once told him I wanted to get married when I was young, he proposed to me. It was just the three of us. Despite all the mental preparation, I still found my heart racing, and tears filled my face. I extended my hand, and the ring slipped onto my finger as I stood in David's embrace. The obstacles on the road, the difficulties of youth, the intense affection hadn't faded with time. It had slowly developed, eventually becoming what people call love. David's perspective.
When did I start liking Hannah? It probably began in high school. Her tied-up hair left an impression on my heart, and love quietly grew.
I thought it was just a one-sided crush that would never amount to anything. But to my surprise, we ended up at the same university. I knew this was my only chance.
So even when we got together, Hannah never understood why I liked her so much. She was like the sun, the only one besides my sister who illuminated my life.
I worked many part-time jobs and finally, just before graduation, I bought a ring. Hannah would always stop and look at it for a long time whenever we were at the mall, so I bought it so she could see it every day.
The day I was going to propose, the hospital called. My sister was about to pass away. It wasn't until her hand lost its warmth in mine that I fully realized what had happened. I couldn't help but feel despair. Why was happiness so hard to come by?
Hannah had endured so much hardship with me. As I looked at the baby in my arms, I realized she was also cherished by her parents. How could I hold her back?
I wanted to tell her in person, but when I saw her from a distance on campus, I realized how cowardly I was. I chose to leave without saying goodbye.
Ethan and I lived in a basement, then a rented apartment. It wasn't until he could go to kindergarten that I started making real money. I was fortunate to be recognized by a mentor, and soon my life began to improve.
I gained the ability to buy a house. 5 years passed, and I found out she still didn't have a boyfriend. I enlisted Ethan's help, and after many efforts, we were finally together again.
Happiness seemed within reach. Listening to Hannah and Ethan's laughter in the living room, I felt a satisfaction I had never known. I tore up Hannah's 4-year-old diagnosis of depression. As the pieces fell into the trash can, I let out a long breath.
Thankfully, everything was still in time. Honey, you're here. Look at your son.
Ethan's perspective.
I know I'm not my dad's biological child because Dad is too young to have a child my age. But it was only when my real dad appeared that I realized the truth.
That day, I felt so helpless, like a child abandoned by the world.
But then Mom came. She cared so much for me. Why couldn't she be my mom?
So I clung to her neck and cried terribly, hoping they wouldn't abandon me. After that day, Dad was very busy. It wasn't until a week later that he had dinner with Mom and me.
I listened at the door the whole time, and when I felt Dad looking at me, I quickly returned to my room.
Dad and Mom treated me the same as always. To take care of my feelings, they didn't plan to have another child.
It was I who suggested wanting a little sister. That night, Mom talked to me a lot, trying to comfort me. But I was already very happy. I felt like I was loved by the whole world.